Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome back to another Eternal News video. The balance changes, patch notes for Monday are already up, and it's time to take a look at what is going to change on Monday and how this is going to affect the game. And there's quite a lot to talk about. So before we dive into it, you know the drill. Hit the subscribe button down below and turn on the notification icon if you haven't already to not miss out on future content. And now let's take a look. Alright, so first things first, the big talk of late has been Endre. I personally felt while the card is strong and the decks are quite good, the combo decks, they are not that great and they're probably not even like top tier decks. So I was hoping they would not touch Endre anytime soon, at least not until like maybe the quarterly championship where we see some more House Throne actually shakes out. But Direwolf apparently felt differently. And yeah, there will be a big nerf to Endre, which, unfortunately, in my opinion, completely kills the card. So, without any other changes, the card will go from 2 power to 3 power, and from 2 fire to 3 fire to make it much harder to play it into 3 faction, let alone the 4 faction decks that have been popping up. Which basically means I think the card is going to be unplayable in really any deck, not just because of the influence requirements, also because of the rate being so much better, so much worse. Like a 3 faction, like a 3 cost 2/2 that deals 1 damage in the first instance is pretty bad and pretty weak and like way behind the curve. Also the fact that now there's not that much potential anymore to sort of try and combo and make her broken, since I feel like you need quite a bunch of copies of Endre to be really powerful. If you just draw like on average 1 copy per game in a regular deck that just plays for Endre, the card was quite nice and had a nice high roll potential, but the first copy was kind of like arguably almost worse than Vara's Favor, if you ask me, which is, don't get me wrong, a very strong card, but has definitely gone down in like playability and power level in Throne, for example, because it's kind of expensive. And sure, every game you draw like 2, which is running above average. In a regular deck, you get something really powerful because the second just is like a decent burn spell that costs 0 power effectively and lets you advance your board in a nice way. And if you can abuse the mastery, like the Stone Scar decks in Expedition, for example, becomes even better, and so on and so forth. But all in all, the card was very like moderate in power level, I would say, in like non-combo decks. And now she's just bad in these decks and not really functional in the combo decks anymore because she's too expensive and costs triple fire in decks that need to be 3 faction usually to operate. Also the fact that now that she costs 3 instead of 2 means she doesn't work in even anymore. Before there was a pretty cool even Praxis deck that was not a combo deck. It was just a typical even value mid-range kind of deck with Obelisk and stuff that played all the like solid bounce spells to reuse Golem and Endre, and now Endre is gone from that, which is a bit unfortunate because I kind of liked the deck. It seemed pretty strong, and it seemed like it made even Praxis a top tier deck, which before was more of like a cool fun thing that was not reliably good enough usually to be a real contender, and this made it into possibly one of the top decks or even one of the best decks in Throne. I actually thought that the even Praxis deck was way better than the combo decks overall, even though it was weak to the combo decks. It felt really, really strong on initial testing. But yeah, combo decks kind of ruined it for everyone, I guess. And now I think Endre will just fade away and not see any play at all in any format, really. Next change is Haunting Scream. Haunting Scream now costs 3 instead of 2, but it can also hit 5 cost cards instead of just 4 cost cards. That's actually a pretty cool change. Like, sure, it makes the card a bit more clunky, but it also is one big difference that was relevant some time ago and might become relevant again. Now it can hit Westwind Herald, something that it couldn't before, and there was a combo deck back then where it would have been amazing if it could have. And yeah, now it can. So that's something to keep in mind and see yeah, how that is gonna pan out, because there might be like a cool, more balanced, slower control combo deck with the new Haunting Scream. There are also a couple of other neat things that it can do, like Feast Caller, or like turn 2 discarding a Rust, and turn 3 Haunting Screaming the Rust, and then the Rust shifts itself after hitting for 7, giving you like sort of a free Rust, which is pretty nice. So there are a couple of decent 5-cost targets that decent 5-cost targets that you can hit with Scream now, which is going to be interesting, and I'm going to be trying to experiment with that a bit and see if there's maybe like a cool Westwind Herald combo control deck. Alright, so, but to be fair, I don't quite get the Scream change. Before Torch was made slow, the card didn't see any play at all, because Torch was in every good deck and really, really good at countering Scream. So every time they drew a Torch, your first Scream, unless you had some way to protect it, like Shakedown or something, was basically just gonna like stopped for 1 power, which is not great, especially if it requires a lot of setup. And there was only really like 1 deck since the game came out of closed beta that was a top tier deck that played Haunting Scream, and that was the Scream aggro deck, the Haunted Highway, or whatever you want to call it. And every other time the deck, the card was either a minor piece of a deck, or like there was the Fallon Reanimator that played Scream before Vara got nerfed the first time. But the thing that made the deck super powerful was the Vara chains. The Haunting Scream was good in it, of course. I mean, otherwise the deck wouldn't have played it, but it wasn't like a major piece, and it didn't get touched because once Vara got changed, the deck fell apart and Scream couldn't hold it together. So yeah, basically every other time Scream was more like a niche kind of cool strategy that wasn't that great. And even like after Torch got changed, I tried to make Scream work, and Scream just didn't feel good enough, so I gave up on it, and only like Endre made Scream a card in a like tier 2 or tier 1 deck. I'm still fairly convinced that the decks were more like really good tier 2 decks than tier 1 decks, simply because they have a hard time beating 50% of the metagame due to being really bad against proactive decks, especially if they also pack some disruption. But yeah, I would have loved to see this shake out more and have a cool like combo grind adaptive deck like the Endre deck as part of the metagame, because I think the part of the metagame would have been healthy long term if it would have even managed to stay a part of the metagame. Like, I'm surprised that they say it was so popular, because in the last couple of days before the patch notes came out, I hardly faced it on ladder at all, and I'm like high MMR throne rank, so I just faced like 1 in 25 games maybe, and that's like super low. Like, that's not popular at all. On the other hand, I was facing like Combre aggro decks every few games, which was very popular, but I mean, that's not a problem. So why is like the Endre decks that you don't even face that often anymore a problem that you need to nerf it that much? I'm really sad and disappointed about this nerf, and really just wish they would have trusted a bit more in the player base just sorting things out. But I guess people were too many people were too vocal about like hating it and feeling the deck is broken and unfair and blah, because obviously when it goes off it looks super broken and does really powerful broken stuff, but ultimately I don't think it actually was. If you play like good decks, sure, if you play bad decks or decks that are really weak to it, then it feels like a really unfair deck because you're just losing to it. But once you play like decks that are good against it, which there were plenty, mostly more proactive decks or well adapted slower decks, then the deck was totally fine. But oh well. Anyway, let's get into the sideboards. So first off, we get a Sand Spitter buff. It goes from 4 power and 1 time being a 5/2 to 3 power double time being a 4/2, which is pretty cool. Like, I felt the card was kind of interesting, but like too expensive and fragile for what it did. So being 1 curve slot lower means the 4/2 plays a lot better than the 5/2 did on 3 than the 5/2 on 4. And also the fact that getting this ability down a turn earlier is pretty big. And actually I think that change without nerfing Endre would have been a further nice addition to the toolkit of fighting Endre, because Sand Spitter actually would have been pretty good against the Endre combo decks, because they're very spell heavy, and making all their spells 1 more expensive is really, really devastating, given that the deck has very slim margins of like creating power and getting to play as many spells in 1 turn as possible. But yeah, still, that's kind of a cool addition. Also pushing dinosaurs a bit, so we'll look into that. And just a cool card to exist, I think. And yeah, then Predatory Carnosaur gets sort of unnerved, almost. It's a bit weaker than before, since it's not a 6/6 for 6, because they felt like that's a bit too good, but it's a 5/6 for 6 again, like, which I think is really good. I never liked the change to 7. The change they made now is one that I would have liked to see the first time they nerfed it, actually. If they want to nerf it, I honestly felt the card didn't need nerfing at all. It just wasn't that popular or dominant anyway, and is really vulnerable to like fast interaction, like Annihilate, Equivocate, combat tricks, Display of Ambition. There were just a lot of like counterplay options. And yeah, if you can't protect your Icaria and it gets eaten by a Carnosaur after hitting them for 5 and war crying for 5, that seems pretty fair too, given how strong Icaria is. But yeah, anyway, Carnosaur is back, and yeah, that should be solid. I'm not sure how much play it's gonna see right off the bat, because especially in Throne, I don't see any deck that would want it right now, but it's another dinosaur, so that's worth noting. And yeah, the 6-drop got quite empty in time, thanks to Heart of the Vault becoming a 7 and Praxis being the prime, like mid-range big time deck these days. So now getting a 6-drop back is pretty sweet and kind of important, I think, to make these kind of decks a bit more viable. So maybe there will be like a decent Praxis mid-range deck with Carnosaur on 6. Maybe Heart of the Vault on 7. Okay, so there's a lot of like just cost buffs basically. First we have Charchain Flail, so basically another reversal of nerfs, one that I thought about a bunch recently every time I came across Flail, and I'm glad they did it, because I think the card was pretty weak at 2, and now at 1 it's pretty cool and pretty interesting, and the power level is high enough in the game that I think the game can easily take it. So that's gonna be a pretty cool card that will see quite a bunch of play, and I'll be experimenting with in both formats in a couple of shells, I think, because the card's pretty nice. Then Gilded Flames, 3 cost, deal 2, draw a treasure, is neat, but it's still like very clunky and inefficient. I don't think this will see constructed play. It's just not as outrageously bad anymore as at 4, but I don't think it's good enough. Phoenix Stone being a 2 instead of a 3 is quite good actually. Like, the card is kind of interesting. I think the problem basically is that normally in Magic, for example, this has a kind of type that is hard to interact with, so you put it in your deck, so your opponent needs sideboard cards to answer it and only has a few or none to do that. But in Eternal, usually, thanks to the market mechanic, most decks have at least 1 attachment removal in the market, allowing them to kill the stone, making it a pretty ineffective market option. So unless you run like 4 stones main, so you can draw multiples after they killed the first, it's not going to be a super reliable tool to fight kind of like spell-heavy reactive control decks. Also, we don't have those decks that much. And if we do, they are still pretty well prepared of dealing with this, like Spellcrack has Ice Bolt and stuff. So yeah, it's kind of a nice change, but I think in the end it will be kind of inconsequential. Then we have Arcanum Hourglass, got changed from 3 to 2. That's actually pretty big, since now you can fetch it with Elvish Swindler, which might be nice. It pairs nicely with the 2-cost site, Torgov's Outpost. But yeah, seems more cool and dirtily than probably actually good, but I'm not sure. Maybe there's like something cool you can do with it that kind of breaks the card. But off the top of my head, I can only like imagine things that I have a hard time believing are, yeah, particularly constructed, viable at the top level. But yeah, it's a cool thing to mess around with. Then Bisma finally cost 3. Like when the card came out and cost 4, I was like, well, this is pretty bad. If this would cost 3, it would actually be an interesting card. Now it is. Still not that likely that it's gonna see much constructed play, but at least now it's a card that could be at least kind of cool and interesting and like weak tier 2 or maybe like tier 3 decks, just like stuff on the fringes that can win some, but it's not like really viable, but at least kind of cool. Then Embargo Officer shift going from 2 to 1 is actually pretty cool and pretty interesting, because the problem is playing Officer on 1 means it just dies pretty quickly, often dies before the opponent can mark it. Now shifting it on 1 means you don't have to skip your entire second turn to do basically nothing. And yeah, usually that at least throws off the on-curve Merchant Smuggler for the opponent, and then they have to try and find an answer for it, making the card a bit more interesting. Still not sure if it's going to see any play, but it's definitely more of a consideration now than it was before, where it, in my opinion, never was really a consideration at all. Yeah, then Tax Collector's Ultimate going from 7 to 5 is definitely a nice improvement and makes it a bit more interesting together with Flail to look at like weapon heavier decks again, because now suddenly you can play like a good 4-cost weapon, be it a Null Blade, a Greatsword, or a Runehammer, and then have a reasonable chance of just turn 5 activating the Tax Collector on it and getting some nice boost there. So yeah, maybe there's like a cool unit heavier Rakano weapon stack with like Tax Collector and Artisan and stuff like that, some Warcry maybe. Definitely interesting. To add to that, we get Treasury Gate at 3 power instead of 4, which is pretty big because now it curves well with all the good 4-cost weapons that I just mentioned, when before it was kind of a bit awkward. And yeah, I mean, I always thought the card kind of had potential, was kind of powerful, but didn't quite fit that well. But now at 3, being cheaper, curving better and so on, I think that might actually even be good enough to spawn an archetype. We'll have to see. I mean, I'm not sure, but it's definitely a card that could be really impactful, and since playing a weapon and creating a unit with those weapon stats and abilities is really powerful actually for free. And the main thing with these things is you need to get them down early enough to not fall too far behind, to have a hard time catching up, and also be not too devastated if your opponent kills it. So yeah, Treasure Gate, pretty cool. We'll be messing around with that. Then Eye of Winter. That's a bit surprising of a buff, because the card saw a bunch of play in the past and is pretty solid. So yeah, this costing 2 instead of 3 is huge. Makes it so much easier to deploy in a like controlling deck, because turn 3 is like kind of wonky. You want to play your Wisdom, you want to play your Merchant, you also want to maybe impact the board depending on the situation to not fall too far behind too quickly. But turn 2 you often have like not much to do, maybe a strategize, maybe depleted power, sometimes a removal, and yeah, a lot of the time you will just be able to deploy your Eye of Winter and start using it at your discretion, like suddenly playing this on 2 and starting to activate it on 3 and 4 with a Hush Rule in hand is looking pretty powerful, because it's really hard for the opponent not to overextend too much into the Hush Rule while not being like just crippled by Eye of Winter. So that's pretty interesting. Then Regression, being a completely terrible card at 4 before, now being actually a pretty decent and reasonable card at 2. Probably not in most decks, but in like a Yorja Mindlink type of deck, the card's actually pretty real, and maybe there's kind of like a cool Mindlink style deck similar to the Elysian event deck that we had in this one event way back. So yeah, not super relevant, but kind of cool to make these like meme transformation decks a bit more competitive and playable, which is not a bad thing. Fearbinder costing 2 instead of 4 to activate makes the card actually not horrible. Like, I felt the card was complete garbage before in any format really. Since I think it costs 3 to play and 4 to activate, and you have to like kill 2 of your units. That is so bad. And yeah, now you can actually just like pay 2 to make this big berserk monster, and that makes the card a lot more decent. Still probably not something you want because it's very situational and resource intensive, and then gets blown out by fatty removal and stuff. But at least it's something to like remotely look at and think about if you could break it somehow, but nothing specific comes to mind right away for me anyway. Then Hideout Pistol getting a buff is kind of surprising. Now it gives Voidbound to the unit it kills, which is a neat addition. It's not super relevant right now, I think, but I mean, the card was good before, just Gunslingers haven't been super viable lately, but in general the card is really powerful and something to always like keep in mind when we get new Gunslingers to see if there's a deck that could support it. Wild Collaborator, a bit weak, but mainly I think suffering from the problem that Stone Scar has too many good cards, like even an Expedition, to usually fit this and fit enough dragons. But yeah, making it a 2/3 instead of a 2/2 makes it a bit more appealing, and probably not quite enough to lean super heavy into the dragon ally theme thing in Expedition over the more good stuff with like the non-dragon mastery stuff and Persuader and so on. But it's a buff, I guess. Knucklebones costing 6 instead of 7 is a decent change. I felt like it was a bit expensive at 7. At 6 it's a bit more appealing. Now you can go like Harsh Rule on 5, Knucklebones on 6 and go into your crazy Knucklebones game. I don't know, maybe there's something cool. Problem is, once again, heavily relying on relics as your plan is pretty risky these days with markets kind of killing these strategies, because if your Knucklebones gets killed, suddenly your deck is not good enough anymore with these random cards not drawing 2 cards a turn to keep up. So it's pretty devastating and kind of makes these decks not very viable because of that, in my opinion. And then Avisaur Patriarch getting changed is pretty huge. It goes from 4 and double time double primal to double time single primal and 3 with no other changes, which is huge. Like, the card's pretty sweet on 3. So much easier to play, making the deck not having to lean as much into primal and being heavy time, which is what you want to be, especially with the side buff of the Spitter. So yeah, maybe there's actually like a legit Dinosaur Explorer themed unit deck. We'll have to look into that, especially if this gets buffed by the Explorer 2-drop, I forgot her name, on 2, and then you play this as like a 3/5 on 3, and then you can suddenly drop your bigger dinosaurs like your World Bearer Behemoth or Twin Brood Sauropods on 4 and stuff like that. Definitely worth looking into. And another reversal of an old nerf, Withering Witch is back, and yeah, now she's a 1/4 again instead of a 1/1. You still can't do the whole like which means you can, I think, if I'm not mistaken, do the whole Lightning Storm into Witch type thing again. Witch into Lightning Storm thing again, because yeah, the Witch survives now. So you can play like turn 5 Witch and then turn 6 Sweep, either with a Lightning Storm, Hailstorm, or Harbinger and stuff like that. That definitely should give Feln quite a nice boost and make the card more playable again, because yeah, the days of like gimmicky sweepers were over, especially given that like big sweepers are not that good in Eternal anymore anyway. But yeah, that witch change definitely is pretty interesting, so we'll see how that pans out. Alright, quite a lot of changes. I like most of them. I'm just really sad about the premature killing of Endre, and that basically kind of reverts thrown back to before, because I don't think the rest of the campaign had any major impact. So it'll be Winchester 3 faction good stuff at the top again, if you ask me. But we'll see what happens during the quarterly championship. And I'll be testing some stuff on stream. Maybe there's something cool new thanks to all those buffs. We'll have to see. Anyway, that's it for the balance patch review. The patch will hit on Monday. I don't think we have a time when. I hope as early as possible. So during my stream on Monday, we will already have the balance patch active, but probably a bit later. We'll see. Maybe they'll do it on like midnight Sunday to Monday. That would be pretty cool. But yeah, we'll find out on Monday. That's it again for this time. Until then, you can catch me live Monday to Friday usually on my live stream on Twitch, trying out these new changes among others. You can find a link in the description below. I will also link the patch notes article down there, of course, for you to read. And yeah, leave a like, subscribe, share it with your friends, all the things. Whitelist YouTube on your Twitch, on your ad block, and so on. You know the drill. That's it again for this time. I'm your host ManuS. Thank you for watching. Bye.